Hello, Chodesh Tov. Welcome to our kind of sukkah kitchen table talk on Cheshvan and the healing properties of this month. And I want to say a happy birthday shout out to Nechama, whose birthday is in Cheshvan. And we were just talking about the herbs that we'll be talking about today. That this is the season of the witch, really. And I'll put out actually a playlist for Cheshvan, because I've been working on that, and I'm going to read a little story about skeleton woman at the end of the video. But why do we say that? Well, there's this song that in my kids' schools they learned about who were the witches. The witches were the wise women, the herbalists, the healers, the midwives. They were the women who knew how to heal you when you're sick. They were the ones also helping to pray for the rains and keep the ceremonies in the old ways. And there was definitely a backlash against that, and many laws even in Judaism against what were the folk practices that the women were accustomed to. And so we were just talking about the negative connotation and the stigma of the old and the ugly and the long nose and the green skin and all of this, versus what some of our children are learning to bring back some reverence for in the schools around who are the witches, and also how to build these houses of celebrating death through the beauty of life. Absolutely. And so my kids' schools definitely have Dia de los Muertos altars everywhere, and the bread offerings, and so that's it's another hand-in-hand side of things right now. Yes. The house of death and the house of life, and who are the ones who mediate between the two.
That's lovely. This time of year I really love, because I was just saying to you before, I actually really get taught by death. Death's always a big teacher for me. It teaches me to see the line pretty clearly between what is and what is not, and what we need and what we don't need, and also what we're living for, what the reason for being alive is, and how to motivate to put the energy in that and get beyond our comfort zone and reach for what we're here for. And I was telling you a story about when I finished college and I went out and got a job, and I worked in a Jewish old age home, and I sat with a man as he was passing, and I said, you have had this body all your life. It brought you into the world, and you've walked and you've danced and you've eaten and you've drunk and you've had children, and then you don't take this with you. And at the end of life, you give your body back and your spirit goes on. And I said the Shema, and on the last word of the Shema, he passed away. And it was a really strong moment for me, because I'd never really sat with anyone that had died before, but it really marked how much I needed to be present for life, and how much even, walking home, I felt very connected to him, and like I really needed to be present in my body and be like appreciating life, so that he could move on and I could move on. So I really like death. I think that there's something like in the Buddhist practices around the world as well, they really teach you that death is a way of appreciating life. And Judaism has a lot of practices as well.
Yes, and I also just want to mention that this month also is the yard site of my mom, who passed away will be 5 years. And because we've been talking about death, and we like to bring ritual to our listeners, we thought we could talk a little bit about what the Jewish rituals are around death. And there's a joke that Jewish people do, I think, 2 things, or maybe 3 things well, like death, marriage, and one other thing.
Bar mitzvah.
But maybe. And we do. We really, there are many rituals that allow us to use our bodies to then have experiences that allow us to process death. So when a person passes away, what immediately upon hearing of the death, there are certain verses you recite, and anybody who was related in the immediate family rips their clothes, and, you know, maybe gets down on the ground. You really, even if maybe you're not feeling that emotion in that particular moment, the purpose of having these rituals is to help you in this crazy, busy, distracted world get to the place of feeling. And so it starts very from the beginning with the ripping of the shirt that then you will wear for 7 days. Again, this is if you're an immediate family member, so a sibling or a parent. And you sit Shiva. Shiva means 7. So you, like Sukkot, 7 days. You are at home, sitting on low chairs. You don't greet people. You don't serve yourself food. You don't bathe. You don't listen to music. You really are just sort of a stationary receiver of people coming to you, and really you're supposed to be talking about the person.
So you just stay in your feeling state.
You just stay in your feeling state. And something I read beautifully that Rabbi Jill Hammer says is that there have been times in Jewish history where they would hire somebody to come to the house of mourning, and who were really good at, people who were really good at mourning. So people who could cry, people who could help the other people in that space get there.
That's awesome.
And I think that's just something we can think about during this time. Like, am I able to feel sadness? Am I able to feel grief? If not, what are rituals that I can do? Do the Jewish rituals speak to me? And thinking about sort of where you are in that place. And after that week passes, then you have the 30 days and then a year of mourning. And within those different levels, there are many prohibitions: no traveling, no buying new clothes, no live music, no dancing. And people take some of those and leave some of those. I myself am a very black and white person, so I just did it all. And you can also do these things and not feel, so it's not necessarily a given. And then the last thing I want to say is that there is a prayer that mourners will say for the anniversary, the yahrzeit of a passing. And it's ironically has nothing to do with the person that's died. It has to do with praising God. And I think that that's a really important Jewish lesson, that even when a person dies, that what you say upon hearing of their death is essentially, God is just. And no matter how traumatic that death might be, or just kind of, you don't get it, our little human brains can't comprehend it. We say, well, God is just, and this happened. And it's the idea that in the end there's a divine plan, and our lives are teeny tiny part of a much bigger picture. And remembering that even through those personally tragic moments is a very important lesson in Judaism. And during all of life, whoever you are. So that's a little bit about the practices, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the herbs that can help.
Yeah, I really like, we have some herbs here that we're going to make into a tea, and I really like black cohosh root. This is forest grown black cohosh root, and this is from Mountain Rose Herbs. So black cohosh is like this gnarly dark root that grows in the forest, and it sometimes has its roots all intertwined, and in our bodies it can really help with kind of bunched up cerebrospinal fluid, and it's traditionally thought quite widely to be used for like menopause and childbirth, like and bringing that on and bringing that flow on. And also with the bunched up cerebrospinal fluid, like whiplash or something like that, it brings the flow. So it's bringing an ease to the areas that are kind of holding on tight. There's a personality type that goes with the black cohosh that can be, strongly grasping and maybe very affected by abusive personalities, or very affected by manipulation, or can find themselves in those situations quite a lot, or addictions. And it may be that they have them themselves, or they're surrounded by it. And so what this root is good for is it's like about holding on. It's about grasping in a way that is helpful. It's like a struggle. And it makes me think of Jacob and his wrestling with the angels. And this is something that my teacher Matthew Wood talked about in his book, 7 Herbs, 7 Teachers. And he talks about archetypes of like the spiritual evolution of people. And one of them is like, there's different guideposts. And one of them is Jacob and how he's grasping on. And he was born grasping onto Esau's heel. And he's always grasping, he's always struggling. And it's like the journey that he's going through is really like about making a leap. It's like the leap across from your comfort zone out into something that you don't know how it's going to be. You don't know where you're going to go. You don't know how you're going to land. You don't know if you're going to get like a limp afterwards like Jacob gets, but he's been wrestling with these angels and he wins, but he comes back a little wounded. It's, and that's kind of like our leap into death, or our leap into the unknown. It's Scorpio. It's totally Scorpio. We don't know where we're going to land, but we have to take that journey,
And stung.
You might get stung, and that stinger is like, the uprootion. You're gonna get like stung out of your comfort zone, like what you were saying before.
And that's like having faith. And one thing that happens this month is that the flood starts, and Noah's told to build this ark. And it sounds kind of silly that there's going to be this flood. Get animals 2 by 2. I mean, you really have to have faith to be able to listen to that,
Right.
What Hashem is telling you.
Especially even more so in these days, like we feel like in those times it might have been easier somehow, but maybe it wasn't. But even more so in these times, So to make that journey is like, it's very brave, And then there wasn't much else going on in the Jewish month otherwise, really. There's just
a lot of, Rachel dies. We read about Leah's death. So it is really a month of mourning our ancestors.
And it's interesting because you think that that's about letting go, but really the other side of it is grasping on, and holding on. So you're holding on to what's really important in life so that you can let go, which
preserving the memory.
And that's how they live on. It's how they live on, It's your ancestors and people that you love is by preserving the memory, and ritualizing it. And in terms of the other herbs here, we also got chaga roots, and chaga is like a mushroom that grows on, it's kind of almost looks like it's a little bit parasitic, and it grows like a tumor on the side of trees. And it has been said that it may be helpful for supporting your immune system through cancer. And it's a very strong, like body ecology of the earth kind of mushroom that feels like it's really helping your whole system, and it really connects to the earth as well at this time. And then we got some shatavari root, which is in the asparagus family. It's a Ayurvedic herb that really works very nicely for women. It's a very moistening yin tonic that nourishes your womb and your genital urinary system. And it's also known to be the herb of 1,000 husbands. So it has a good, strong effect on your uterus and your fertility. And so there's this one. And then the saffron, which is, it's kind of like you're going from the roots, and then you've got the chaga, which is down below, and then you've got the shatavari, and right at the top you have, we were thinking of yarrow as well, right? And yarrow being very much like the wounded healer. So it's almost like it's taking the arrow and it's making a mark for the stars. It's a very much more Martian quality to it, which is also a ruler of Scorpio. And it feels like that's like a beautiful kind of helper and healer for this month as well, of like giving you strength to get you out of the dark times and the depression or the death, and giving you a sense of direction of where you're going with it, and a warrior-like quality. And then the saffron at the top, the saffron was used as incense in the temple at this time of the month, and it's very, it's like the tiny little stamens of the crocus plant, right? And it's so fragrant, and it's supposed to kind of like tease out the intimate secrets of all the other plants and help them blend together. So where plants may not have necessarily blended before, it helps to bring their secrets out so that they can blend. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I think we overall talked about the tea as being good for the intestines, because that is the organ of the month. And so choosing those herbs also based on knowing that we're working on like cleansing our intestinal systems and blending those together, and our urinary tract.
So I was going to also bridge this link between our herbs here and the scent. The sensory stimulus for Cheshvan, for this moon time, is the nose and smell and aromas, and saffron being also very closely related to. Around here we have a lot of marigold, and so I brought some marigold to our gathering, and these little ones are Mexican marigold. And they are so fragrant, and they just really fill the space around them with this life, this vitality. And so with that, our smell is connected to our memories, and so our loved ones and the blessings of their life and their memories can be enhanced by bringing these beautiful flowers for healing sorrow or grief around death. And we see this a lot also in my kids' schools around Dia de los Muertos, and I've just been so fascinated with the parallel between our having just dwelt in a sukkah and invited into ushpizin and having all of these like harvest time foods around us, and then the little kind of huts that are built for these altars that I see in the schools. And it's really about adorning we adorn the house of life, we adorn the house of death just as we adorn the house of life. So there's also other flowers that can be helpful for heart healing and for soothing any pain of grief and loss. And rose and rose water. Can you pass the rose water and the other? So, you can have this beautiful rose water, or have a bowl of rose water below the bed. And this is a flower water from rue, which is over here. I'm going to bring my basket. Where's my rue? It's over here. It's this yellow one, and it is so perfumey. So perfumey. And so, I soaked it in some water in the sun with just a drop of alcohol to preserve it.
Wow, it smells like wood to me.
It's kind of like butter and pepper.
It's very, I feel like it's so perfumey. It makes me think of my grandmother, because I associate my grandmother with wearing perfumes. Anyway, so we have all these amazing fragrances, and I think anything that you're surrounding yourself with, the flowers or the flower essence, and it's going to be evocative. It's going to evoke some memories in you.
Can I just? Yeah. I love how you're connecting smell to memory, because smell is also the one sense that we have that wasn't adulterated. That's not adulterated. It's like the purest sense. And this idea of connecting to our ancestors with our smell, and that we'll know that the Mashiach or the Redeemer is here because of what it smells like. It's just like interesting to think about. And then that connection between, like, you know, there's the Jewish belief that when the Redeemer comes, all of our loved ones will return, with whatever that means, and kind of the connection between the Redeemer and our ancestors, and smell as being the common denominator.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and yet we as a culture, we kind of want to stay away from death, and even from our Jewish past. You know, I know a lot of people who have just gotten just as far away from it as they can, and don't relate to mourning, and don't relate to their ancestors or any traumas that happened in the family. You know, our response these days is,
well, we're not given a way to, I mean, we need better ways of honoring it so that we're moving through it and we're not stuck, and we're not like, you know, it's a heavy burden to carry otherwise. And, you know, sometimes I feel people like just want to have their own lives and they don't want to carry that weight. But we're not given a way of like allowing that to move through us, and so it's not our story, and yet it is part of our story, but we're not like acting it out in a way that's like crippling our life now, you know. There needs to be a whole load more like intelligence around that, I think, you know.
And I think that's why many of these rituals around death, and many Jewish rituals in general, you cannot do alone.
Yeah.
You need to do them in a community.
Yeah.
And you need that sort of collective like history and understanding in order to invoke whatever it is being invoked.
Right. I feel like that I definitely, even just being in the sukkah and feeling like all the people around, it's like that's all what it's about, is bringing everything into community. There's nothing that you're doing alone, you know, it's all about sharing, which is one of the things that I love and is slightly terrifying about Judaism.
Yeah, so I had a friend reach out to me recently and say, you know, I want to commemorate my mother's yahrzeit, and can you help me with creating some kind of special altar? Just didn't know how to quite do it, so I thought it'd be helpful to put that out here and just show. I guess he thought so. Some basic ingredients. Well, where would I start? I would start with flowers, a picture, and a candle, and maybe I would also throw a tablecloth. So I'm gonna turn the camera around here. Can you take the seat? So there we have it. A very simple. Actually, I'm going to go over here because the yahrzeit candle is here, and these you can buy often, even in just the supermarket for a yahrzeit candle, and you can also definitely get it at Afikomen if you're here in Berkeley or Oakland. Look up Afikomen Judaica for everything, including this honey. So this is my grandmother. This is my Nana Mabel here, and her siblings. And so flowers, candle, picture, tablecloth, and then oftentimes something that might have been their favorite food. So this is a honey or jam. I'll often put out maybe some of the biscuits that we would have for tea, and that's it. That's your basic ingredients for beautiful. Sitting with, and then, you know, besides putting it there, it's how you interact with it. So especially when there's the tea biscuits or even a cup of tea, and I have my grandma's porcelain, then sitting with it and like serving it has been something I've gotten accustomed to doing, to just sit that night with that candle, with that picture, and as if they were right there, as if I actually was having tea.
Which one's your Nana? She's got such a cute face. Look at that.
Cheeky.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Lovely.
Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. going to read the story of Skeleton Woman. And Alana Brody here, visiting from New York, is going to accompany us on guitar. Skeleton Woman had done something of which her father disapproved. Don't know what that was. No one knows. It was so long ago, no one remembers what it is that she had done. But her father dragged her to the cliffs and threw her over and into the sea. Some say she said, "I love you, Father," even as she was falling to the sea below. And there the fish ate her flesh and plucked out her eyes, and she lay under the sea, her skeleton turning over and over in the currents. One day a fisherman came fishing. Well, in truth, many came to this bay, but this fisherman had drifted far from his home place and didn't know what the local fishermen knew, that this bay was haunted. The fisherman's hook drifted down through the water and caught, of all places, in the bones of Skeleton Woman's ribcage. The fisherman thought, "Well, now I've got a big one. I really have got one." In his mind, he's thinking of how many people this great fish would feed, how long it would last, how long he might be free from the chore of hunting. And as he struggled with the great weight on the end of his hook, the sea was stirred to a thrashing froth, and his kayak bucked and shook. For she who was beneath struggled to disentangle herself, and the more she struggled, the more she tangled in the line. No matter what she did, she was inexorably dragged upward, tugged by the bones of her own ribs. Well, as he tugged on his line, he did not see her bald head rise above the waves. He didn't see the little coral creatures glinting on her skull. He did not see the crustaceans on her ivory teeth. When he turned back with his net, her entire body had come to the surface and was hanging from the tip of his kayak by her long front teeth. "Ah!" cried the man, and his heart fell to his knees. His eyes hid in terror on the back of his head, and his ears blazed bright red. He screamed and knocked her off the prow with his oar and began paddling like a demon towards the shore, not realizing she was tangled in his line. He was frightened all the more because she appeared to stand upon her toes while chasing him all the way to the shore. No matter which way he zigzagged, she stayed right behind him. Her breath rolled over the water in clouds of steam, and her arms flayed as though to snatch him down into the depths. "Ah!" he wailed and wailed. And in one leap, he was out of his kayak, running for the shore, and she right behind him. Over the rocks he ran, and she followed. She kept right up. In fact, she grabbed some of the frozen fish as she was dragged behind. She began to eat because she had not eaten for such a long time. The man reached his snow house and dove into the tunnel, and on hands and knees went into the interior. Panting and sobbing, he lay there in the dark, his heart a drum, a mighty drum. He felt safe at last. He lit his oil lamp, and there she lay in a tumble on his floor, one heel over her shoulder, one knee inside her rib cage, one foot over her elbow. He could not say what it was, maybe the light of his lamp, but he felt some sort of kindness come into his breath, and he reached out his grimy hands, and using words like a mother to child, began to untangle her from the fishing line. He worked this way all through the night and put his furs around her. She said not a word, lest this hunter take her out and throw her down to the rocks and break her bones to pieces. The man got tired and slid under his sleeping skins and soon was dreaming. And sometimes as humans sleep, a tear escapes from their eye. The skeleton woman saw the tear glisten in the firelight, and she became so thirsty. She tinkled and clanked and crawled over to the sleeping man and put her mouth to his tear. The single tear was like a river, and she drank and drank and drank until her many years-long thirst was quenched. While lying beside him, she reached into the man and took out his heart, the mighty drum. She began banging on the drum and singing. The more she sang, the more her body started to fill out with flesh. She sang for hair and eyes and nice fat hands. She sang the divide between her legs, her breasts, and all the things a woman needs. And they say that she sang the sleeping man's clothes off and crawled into bed next to him, where they tangled in intimate embrace all night. People don't know where this fisherman's woman came from, but everyone knows they were happy and well fed for all of time. They were always seen together, and that's all they knew. This from Women Who Run with Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype, Clarissa Pinkola Estes.
Yay.
So we just wanted to end with that story because it's really a parable of not running from our past and not running from even the parts of our past and our ancestry that might be scary, that we don't want to see, that is all tangled up. And we can do a lot of work with ancestral healing and untangling the stories and the gaps of information. And I was going to share a website too of JewishAncestralHealing.com right now that Elsa Asher and Yael Shanzit have been offering workshops in that. And you know, that story evokes for each of us different messages around relationship and around ancestors. And
Even our own self-work, you know.
yeah. So I
Thank
just
you
bless
for
you to
watching.
have a good relationship to this month of the flood and month of Cheshvan.
Also known as MarCheshvan. You might hear it translated in that way, which means bitter. Cheshvan. And I'm sure after listening to this recording, you can understand why that might be why we call this month MarCheshvan. So,
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.
And subscribe.